For your patience, and thanks for joining us today. Here is Congressman Scott, and he is going to get us started.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us at this event. We're going to have an opportunity to learn about how to avoid drug use and delinquency and get people on a path towards college and workforce, and also learn about the Youth Promise Act, which supports communities that will create local, comprehensive, evidence-based strategies for turning what the Children's Defense Fund calls the cradle-to-prison pipeline into a cradle-to-college and career pipeline. And this actually marks a continuation of a relatively recent trend where people and politicians are trying to get away from just wait for people to drop out of school, join a gang, mess up, get caught, and spend all your time arguing about how much time they're going to serve, and instead focus on investment in children before they get in trouble, getting them on the right track, and keeping them on the right track. We have been sloganeering and coming up with sound bites that just lock them up, and I think you have a pass out that, did we just pass out? Okay. The first chart shows where we are in incarceration. The United States locks up a higher portion of its population than any country on earth by far. The interesting part about this graph is that the Pew Research Center has said that any incarceration rate over 350, you start getting diminishing returns from locking people up over 500 per 100,000. It's actually counterproductive because you got so many people with criminal records, you got messing up so many families, you're wasting so much money. Over 500 per 100,000 actually counterproductive. And if you see on this chart, the United States is at over 700 per 100,000 in incarceration. African Americans are locked up at 2,200. 10 states lock up blacks at the rate of almost 4,000 per 100,000. We start early. Next chart. We start early with the highest youth incarceration in the world. And that's general. If you did just minority youth incarceration, it'd be off the chart. We know education is a is significantly correlated with crime. This chart shows African American males 26 to 30. Green is a high school graduate, red is a high school dropout. In 1970, dropouts are people who graduated, got a diploma, about the same thing in terms of first pairs employed, not the labor force and in jail, armed services. But by the year 2000, we now have an information-based high-tech economy. If you don't have at least a high school diploma, you need more than that, but if you don't have at least a high school diploma, the chance of you being even employed by the time you're 26 to 30, about 30%, about a little over 35% just out in the street and not in the labor force, and incredibly over 30% in jail today. That's not probation, parole, outstanding warrant, and all that. That's behind bars today. And so you can see what happens if you don't get a decent education. We need to use some of the money that we're spending on counterproductive incarceration on getting young people on the right track and keeping them on the right track, because we know that if we spend money on teen pregnancy prevention, so fewer babies are born into dysfunctional families, and prenatal care that can reduce mental retardation and learning disabilities, and nurse visits that can reduce child abuse, which is highly correlated with future crime, and early childhood education, and making sure that everybody can read by the 3rd grade. Teachers say up to the 3rd grade you learn to read, but after the 3rd grade you read to learn. If you can't read by the 3rd grade, you're not learning after the 3rd grade, and you're on the way to dropping out. After school programs and the kinds of programs that we're going to hear about this afternoon, if we invest in those and get young people on the right track and keep them on the right track, we can do a lot better. And we've got the money. Next one. If we just look at the back of the envelope arithmetic, if we reduce the African American incarceration rate from 2,200 and some to 500, you remember that's counterproductive. You'd have 1,750 some fewer incarcerated, about 29,000 a year. It's about $50 million in a community of 100,000 being wasted in counterproductive incarceration. And divide that by the number of children, let's say about 30,000, $1,600 per child, but if you targeted that money to the 1/3 of the children that are at risk, you're up to $5,000 per child per year that we could be spending if we weren't spending it all in counterproductive incarceration. And in 10 states, you go through the arithmetic, it's almost $10,000 per child, every at-risk child, every year, wasted on counterproductive incarceration when you can make those investments in things we know that actually make a difference. Now, we know that we take advantage of that idea with the Youth Promise Act by requiring communities to come together, everybody that has anything to do with children getting in trouble, obviously law enforcement, but the school system, court services like probation, parole, social service, mental health, health care, the business community, Boys and Girls Clubs, and other after-school programs, bring them all together and sit them around the table and make sure they come up with a credible plan to reduce youth violence. And the first thing we ask them to do is figure out how much they're wasting on counterproductive incarceration, because many will be embarrassed when they see that number. If you got a little community of 100,000, and they look up and notice that they're spending $50 million or $100 million in counterproductive incarceration, that's the same order of magnitude that they're spending on their school board budget. And then if you add on, because if you have good primary prevention strategies, you're not only going to reduce crime, you're going to reduce teen pregnancy. So add on the Medicaid and social services related to teen pregnancy and put that number in the middle of the table. So as you come up with your plan, and you're going to cut this problem in half, $100 million, $50 million, you're not going to limit your imagination to little programs that cost $5,000 or $8,000. You're going to come up with a bold plan that will actually get the job done. Now, once you come up with a plan, apply. If successful, the federal government will fund it. Now, part of the strategy, though, is what's called reinvestment. Because we know these programs work and reduce crime, they also save a lot of money. So look around the table and figure out who's going to save some money. Obviously, corrections are going to save a lot of money. But in my district in Virginia, we had a little $2.5 million program that reduced the number of murders in a community from 19, a couple of years later, it was down to 2. If you look at the number of people, and about 4 people living for everyone that dies from gunshots, all the people that did not show up at the Medical College of Virginia trauma unit, you probably saved the $2.5 million right there. So find out everybody around the table that's going to save some money and get them to contribute part of it back. Now, we're going to hear a little bit about how much money you can save in these programs. And so we need to make sure that as we save the money, you don't have to get all the savings. If you can just get a little piece of it back, you can keep the programs running. And so that's what the Youth Promise Act does. We know it works. We know these programs work. I know in Boston they finally decided to get serious about juvenile murders. They're having about 12 or 13 a year, about 1 a month. They came together with a serious, comprehensive, evidence-based plan. They went 3 years without a single juvenile murder. And so we know these programs can work, but we need to make sure that we get serious. The Youth Promise Act requires that whatever you do, it doesn't tell you what to do, other than it's evidence-based. You say, well, evidence-based as opposed to what? As opposed to the slogans and sound bites that people would try to fund if you didn't put evidence-based in there. And these evidence plans work, and our distinguished guests know they work because they've been on the front line. We know our first speaker will be John Forte, who is an activist and advocate for social justice. In 2011, he did a 9-week performance tour through Russia and donated all of the proceeds to local orphanages and international charities. Here in the United States, he's involved in programs to help at-risk youth steer clear of drugs and crime. He taught a music class in a program called In Arm's Reach, a Harlem-based nonprofit art, music, prison visitation, and educational mentoring organization that serves youth with incarcerated parents. He also works with Music Unites, another nonprofit It brings music education to underprivileged children with underfunded inner city school systems. His work and dedication to children not only is across the country but throughout the world, and he's a one-man force joining force with other organizations to deal with the change for whom we're privileged and honored to have him here today. And we know that music works. Those children involved in the discipline of learning music are not the ones we're talking about in juvenile justice. So John, it's good to see you here today. We also have Jessica, Carla, Lima-Moran, and Sean Anthony Moran, who are instructors in Capoeira, Brazil. It's a Los Angeles group that performs and teaches Capoeira. It's a Brazilian martial art that combines dance, acrobatics, and music. They've done special outreach to include youth from Los Angeles crime-ridden communities, using values and principles of martial arts with these youth, and giving them the confidence and courage to resist gang involvement and delinquency. Likewise, people involved in these activities are not the ones we're seeing in crime. We'll also hear from Bob Baskin, the president of Peace Alliance, a nonprofit alliance of organizations and advocates throughout the United States that works to promote a comprehensive and coordinated approach to preventing and resolving violent conflict. In conjunction with the youth-led Student Peace Alliance, Bob and his colleagues are creating a grassroots movement to raise awareness of peace building and Youth Promise Act across the country. I'm also want to commend John, Jessica, Sean, and Bob for their activism, and also for Brian Bumbarger, who is an expert on research, who will bring some research before us, particularly in Pennsylvania, identifying evidence-based programs that not only work but also save money. We know that all of these speakers are making a difference, and if we can get the Youth Promise Act, they'll have some more resources to actually accomplish their goal. I'm going to call Jennifer back. Jennifer Bellamy is with the Washington office of the ACLU. She's been a juvenile justice advocate for many years, and we're just delighted to have her with us today. Jennifer.
Thank you, Congressman Scott, and thanks to our panelists. Just one panelist that I would also like to just introduce you to as well. Jessica's husband, Sean, who is also, could you say it again? Capoeira instructor, and he will also be sharing some of his experiences in the community as well. So first we will hear from John Forte. We're so happy to have him here with us, so please join me in giving him a very warm welcome.
I was actually hoping that I was not going to be the first person, because how do you set the tone at one of these talks and discussions? I don't know. I don't know what to say. I don't know whether to be here to talk for 2 minutes, for 20, but I'll try to keep it very, very brief. So my work as a creative, as a musician, as a filmmaker, as a photographer, would not be complete without service, particularly to young people. I'm from Brownsville, Brooklyn, and I had a very, very fortunate childhood insofar as I came from a very nurtured home. It was a single-parented home, but my mother did everything within her power to make sure that I could cultivate the artistic sensibilities that ultimately led me to where I am today, throughout all the ups and the downs included. One of the things that I did with In Arms Reach was we did a 6-month course. It was songwriting as catharsis, where young kids who had one or both of their parents in prison would meet once a week, and we'd get together and we'd write a song. And it seems like a really easy task. It seems like it's very, very simple, until you realize that, well, most of these kids don't do activities together, especially creative activities. And so we learned how to cooperate, but we also learned how to express ourselves creatively. And by the end of that, for these kids to hear a song that was represented, that represented how they felt and what their issues were, they found their voice, and that empowered them, and they continued to come back. And to Congressman Scott's point, if we can keep the arts alive, we can keep the mind alive, and we can keep the curiosity alive. And that little phenomenon called waking nihilism that Cornel West has coined might not be as insidious as we witnessed, which would ultimately lead to our younger people risking their freedoms because they feel that the options are too few and the roads are too far. So I'm just trying to do my part as an artist to keep those arts alive in the communities that need them most. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. And in addition to hearing about John's work, we're also going to have an opportunity to hear about some of the exciting work that Jessica and Sean are doing in Los Angeles to help keep kids on the right track. And so I think we'll proceed with Jessica, and then we'll show a brief video clip, and then Sean will speak, and then we'll have Bob as well.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Congressman Scott, for giving us the opportunity to be here. Boa tarde. My name is Jessica de Lima-Moran, and many know me by my Capoeira name, which is Pavão. It means peacock. Myself and my teaching partner and husband, Sean Moran, we live and work in the historical community of Northeast Los Angeles. We are business owners, artists, youth activists, mentors. We love Northeast LA. It's a vibrant, largely Latino community made up of smaller neighborhoods, 7 smaller neighborhoods: Glassell Park, Highland Park, Mount Washington, Eagle Rock, Atwater Village, Cypress Park, and Montecito Heights. Northeast LA is home to some of the oldest and most powerful gangs in Southern California. In the 80s and 90s, it was known for racially charged conflict. Brown on black violence was prevalent. Over the past 10 years, our neighborhood has begun to change. Demographics are shifting, there's money and investment, but the gang problem is much the same. In Northeast LA, gang affiliation is multi-generational. Gang culture is part of the fabric of our neighborhood. It is woven into the history and informs so much of the inner workings, but does not define it. Working families, friendly neighbors, creative youth, talented homegrown community leaders, faith-based organizations, artists, mentors, the schools, the teachers, that is what defines our neighborhoods. We define our neighborhoods. It's not enough to say gangs are bad. Let's arrest every last gangster. The suppression-only model has not worked. It has pushed the root of the problem down deeper into the subculture of our neighborhoods. It has left youth and families with insufficient resources, a void of opportunity, and transferred the burden to overcrowded and loosely defined correctional facilities. There are so many stories to tell, so many numbers, so much sadness and tears, so many young lives lost, so many futures destroyed because of youth and gang violence. The City of Los Angeles and its leaders, CBOs, prevention providers, intervention and reentry services, have been working to change what is often referred to as the cradle to prison, or even worse, the cradle to grave pipeline. But the long-term issue of gangs cannot be solved without more year-round, well-funded programming. Programming that is from the community, by the community. What may work for us in Northeast LA may not work in South Central. We need to listen to the community, to the parents, the OGs, the young ones coming out. It's far past the time for investment in our most valuable resource, our black and brown youth that are dying and being incarcerated at a far more frequent rate. They need to be given a chance. They need to be allowed not only to survive, but to succeed. Some years ago, we were here to advocate for the Youth Promise Act. It was a moving event. We were hopeful. It's tragic to think how many lives have been lost since. Now in 2013, I'm hopeful once more. And I think back to what one of the speakers said in 2009. It was something that really stuck with me. They said, let's not call them at-risk youth. They're at-promise youth. And I believe that. I believe that, and I believe we define our neighborhoods. There is no one answer to remedy gang violence, but there's one answer to better ensure youth success. Investing resources and energy in our black and brown youth in a sustainable and comprehensive manner. Year-round access to conventional and unconventional prevention and intervention services, sports, arts, education, mentoring. I believe this is the way to ensure promise. We define our neighborhoods. We are capoeira teachers, and like many dedicated artists across the country, we work in the community with youth and families. For those that are unfamiliar, capoeira is an Afro-Brazilian martial art created by enslaved Africans in Brazil. It is often referred to as the art of survival. Capoeira was once considered illegal. Practitioners were considered thugs, mercenaries, gangsters. They were the black and brown Brazilians from the periphery of society. They were the underground. Capoeira was their self-defense, it was their community, their culture, and their safety net. Our organization, Capoeira Brasil, has programming in a few cities across the United States. We see in our work that youth need something to belong to. They need to feel valued, listened to. They need something to inspire and challenge them. They need education, support. They need to develop the ability to find practical solutions to complex problems. Specifically, with youth raised in neighborhoods with multi-generational gang involvement, they need something to replace the sense of belonging they get from gang affiliation. Capoeira is a family for many of the youth in our neighborhood. It offers this sense of belonging. It challenges and inspires them. And it does this because it's a different form of expression. It's nonverbal communication. It is a community and a culture in and of itself with a history that almost parallels that of gang culture. The dynamics of capoeira are similar to gang culture. There's a hierarchy. You are tested both physically and emotionally. There's an element of loyalty. There's a sense of duty. And what the youth love the most, you get a nickname. But in the game of capoeira, which happens between two people in a circle called a roda, there are two winners and no losers. Because of the tireless work of innovative capoeira masters, in 1937, it was removed from the penal code. Capoeira was recognized as the national sport of Brazil. Over the past 75 years, the growth of capoeira has been phenomenal. It has gone from being outlawed in Brazil to an internationally practiced sport and means of communication and cultural expression. Capoeira is not an easy sell to those that have never heard of it. It's almost indescribable. It's famously referred to as the fight dance. But for the youth and families that train it, that learn the culture of Brazil, the music and history of capoeira, it is an outlet. It is a friendship, family, dance, fight, strength, empowerment, community, expression, discipline. It is their voice. Last summer, about 20 minutes before our free community capoeira class at Highland Park Rec, a group of our students were outside the gym next to another group of students when two young men, later identified as gang affiliated, shot and seriously injured a 19-year-old girl. It was tragic, and that story repeats itself all too often in our neighborhood. But these young capoeiristas did not leave the park. They stayed, we taught class, and we showed that their voices could not be silenced. We defined our neighborhoods. Our programming in Los Angeles and other cities across the country has been growing stronger and stronger each year. More and more youth and families are joining our roda. In Los Angeles, we began with a handful of families. Today, we serve more than 250. We function with absolutely no funding. We recycle uniforms from adult students or buy them out of pocket. Our instruments and equipment, we purchase ourselves. Our space is borrowed from Parks and Rec. I can only imagine how many more we could serve, support, and mentor if the Youth Promise Act passed. We have dreams of taking our youth to Brazil, showing them what is out in the world for them to experience, giving them the opportunity to train in the birthplace of capoeira. We would love for them to be here today, to perform for all of you. We would love to show you their hope and their promise. Share with all of you their talent and drive. The potential is infinite if the investment challenge is met. There's a song in capoeira that says, "A hora é essa." The time is now. The time is now to pass the Youth Promise Act. We have a short video that talks a little bit about our capoeira program. I hope you like it. Obrigada.
Thanks so much to Jessica for not only being here and telling us about the program, but also showing us how it works on the ground too. It looks so exciting and like so much fun, and it's really wonderful that organizations are already providing that to communities for free, but we could do so much more, you know, if we would go ahead and pass the Youth Promise Act and provide communities with the funding and the support that they really need. So now we'll hear from Sean, and he will talk a little bit about how the program has had an impact on his own personal life. So thank you, and please join me in welcoming Sean.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Sean Anthony Moran. My students call me Professor Chegado. I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was given the name Chegado when I joined Capoeira Brazil in 2002. I thought I would get a name like Panther, like Blade. Well, my mestre thought that Chegado was a better fit. He was right. The name means your close friend has arrived. It's not as tough sounding as I might have liked it to be, but it offered its own power. A name like Panther would provoke, but someone who is Chegado to you is an instant friend, someone who's trustworthy. Today, more people know me around the world by my Capoeira nickname than my real name. Some folks in my family still can't pronounce it right. I've had the honor to play and teach this revolutionary art for the past 15 years. I've filled my passport, playing and teaching, training and learning. I've had the opportunity to work with some of the most amazing artists of our time in music, commercials, film, and all types of multimedia projects. We participate in one of the largest and fastest growing amateur sports in the world. Capoeira is an international community that is developed in locations rich and poor, providing a global network of artistic athletes. Capoeira is an entire culture, complete with history, music, language, and folklore. Capoeira can be an equal playing field. We have no weight, age, or gender requirements. We promise to make you stronger. That's it. I think it's every artist's dream to believe that their art has the power to change things. That's why I believe that supporting artists will give them the power to change the things they can. These are the mentors we've all been looking for. The Youth Promise Act would pave the way for more of this type of support for arts programs. When I was young, I learned about gangs through TV. My mother was a highway patrol officer, so I didn't grow up looking for laws to break. I grew up to identify myself as Creole, a member of a very distinct society of African Americans. We eat gumbo and dance zydeco. Though we all considered ourselves African American, we had our own unique culture and heritage. As a kid, I watched my mother, in her 18 years with the CHP, participate in another type of society, the culture of law enforcement, equipped with its own language, rituals, and hierarchy. Coming from the Bay Area, our gang problems had a different look. In the Bay, it was all about your block or your turf, not about colors. The first time I heard about Bloods and Crips were from movies like Boys in the Hood. I thought of gangs as disorganized. They were just groups of punks with nothing else to do but cause trouble. I had no idea that they too were participating in a culture rich with language, music, history, folklore, heritage, and hierarchy. This idea was an important shift from my early perception. Being tough on crime has never cured our streets of the violence. The walls of my neighborhood still say avenues, which are then crossed out and tagged over with CXP for Cypress Park Boys. We work as cultural exchange artists. We attempt to provide an alternative society, a support group for like-minded people who are willing to believe in something outside their own comfort zone. We are the original social network. We're a flashback to a time before Facebook and Twitter, when people came together in communion to share, sing, and be inspired. If we intend to work with the gang culture, we need to highlight these alternative societies, these crazy safe places where our neighborhoods come together and enjoy creative activities. When we first started our free community capoeira program, it was more on the crazy side than the safe side. Our community needed convincing. We were asking them to give up their space. For the next hour, we demanded to use their gym and their basketball courts. We asked them to stop dribbling balls and shooting hoops on the side. You could tell some of the local neighborhood crews were upset. Building respect is a slow process. Respect is fragile and can be broken easily. It was important to set this example in the beginning, because soon those that were on the fence about joining our class became more confident. They began to believe in the safety of the space. And in the end, it was the moms, the grandmas, the tios and tias, the kids and the families that really took control of their own environment. It's hard to be mad at a class that your grandmother's taking. So now we have been given a go-ahead. When we come into the gym, the basketball players tell each other to get off the court. They stop each other from being noisy and quiet down when we teach for that hour. These are places where you can come when you feel good and bad, happy or hurt. It's a place where you test yourself and find answers to questions, where we are surrounded by good examples and trustworthy mentors. Now, as a martial art, this is inherent in our study, but I believe that all arts have something martial about them. Artists marshal the spirit, which then breeds creativity and thus produces more art. We need investments in our artistic ecosystems. They're the springs which feed healthy environments. There's an unmentioned respect for arts in our neighborhood. Believe it or not, the only walls that are not tagged up are the ones that have really elaborate graffiti pieces on them. It's like an unspoken code of honor. If you make it beautiful enough that the streets enjoy it, then it will be spared. So like it or not, the community should be listened to. We cannot enforce our way to some utopian society where gangs no longer exist. We should be working within our society to cure the sickness of violence. The people of our communities will always remain the same, but their decisions and how they handle conflict resolution can be altered. We never do this. When we travel to places, we're usually thinking of movements to teach. We try to make our classes accessible and consider how to alter them for the different levels that are there. I'd rather have my purple cord on than this gray tie. It's much easier for me to stand here and perform my art than to speak to you in this manner. So we spend most of our time speaking with body language. So I want to thank you for listening and inviting us here to speak about our art and our programming.
Thanks so much. And we are also excited about, hopefully in the future having you come back and perform your art. I think that would be wonderful and exciting. And so now we'll hear from Brian Bumbarger a little bit about some of the evidence that we know is out there that is supportive of everything that we just shared today.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Bumbarger, and I am the Assistant Director for Knowledge Translation and Dissemination at the Prevention Research Center at Penn State University in Pennsylvania, where I direct a project called the Evidence-Based Prevention and Intervention Support Center. For about 15 years, I've been working closely with state government agencies in Pennsylvania, with community-based providers and with communities to roll out an initiative that looks an awful lot like the Youth Promise Act. This is an initiative that recognizes that youth violence is a public health problem and should be viewed as a public health problem and not solely as a public safety problem. It recognizes that violence is preventable and that there are known underlying risk factors that predispose kids and families and communities to youth violence and drug use and school failure. And that the constellation of those known risk factors is different in each community. And so we need not a single narrowly defined silver bullet, if you will, to disseminate to every community across this diverse country. We need a structure, a process, a model that is well grounded in research, that enables communities to collect local data on the known risk factors that predispose kids in that community to violence, to be able to create a sophisticated diagnostic profile for that community that will allow the community to select prevention and intervention strategies that are going to be most effective in that community. Pennsylvania, like the United States, is incredibly diverse. It's been described as Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with Montana in between. So we have in the city of the school district of the city of Philadelphia, there are about 215,000 students in one school district. And we have students who live in rural Elk County, Pennsylvania, where there are literally more elk than people. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge to first recognize that those diverse kinds of communities all have this, they're all struggling with the same challenges. They want their kids to grow up to be productive citizens. They want their kids to grow up to be the best that they can be, to achieve all that they can achieve. Every community, no matter how diverse, is struggling with youth violence and bullying and school dropout and truancy and youth drug use. What is different, though, is the pathway, the most common pathways to those problems are different from one community to the next. And this is the beauty of the Youth Promise Act, is that it is not a prescription. It's not a one-size-fits-all package. It's about allowing community voice and recognizing the difference between communities, but establishing some parameters around that so that what communities do is grounded in research, grounded in a good needs assessment, and that it makes use of evidence-based, proven effective programs and practices for both prevention and intervention. We've been doing this, as I said, in Pennsylvania. We've been doing this for about 15 years. Unfortunately, not in all of our communities, not even in most of our communities, and that's why we still have one of the highest incarceration rates in the country, and we have about a $2 billion a year state corrections budget. So it's not all rosy. But what I can tell you is that in the 100 communities in Pennsylvania where we have implemented this strategy, this combination of community-based, data-driven, comprehensive prevention planning, coupled with the use of proven effective prevention strategies, what we've seen when we compare the kids that grow up in those communities to kids that grow up in other demographically similar Pennsylvania communities that aren't using this strategy, we find that the kids that grow up in communities that are using this Youth Promise Act-like strategy have significantly lower risk factors, they have significantly higher protective factors, they have significantly lower prevalence rates of drug use and delinquency. And in a recent second study that we completed, where we followed kids longitudinally over a 5-year period, we were surprised to find 2 new outcomes emerging. These kids also have significantly higher school engagement and 33% better academic achievement. Now, on one hand, this is surprising because this is a youth violence prevention initiative. It was meant to prevent youth violence and youth crime. So it's a little surprising to some that it would generate 33% better academic achievement. But when you think about the fact that what we're promoting is a public health focus, we're focusing on the underlying risk factors for youth violence. And guess what? The underlying risk factors for youth violence are many of the same underlying risk factors for drug use and school failure. So it makes sense that by addressing those underlying risk factors rather than these narrowly defined behavioral outcomes like bullying or gangs, that we would not only see impacts on delinquency and youth violence, but we'd also see impacts on youth drug use and academic achievement. We further did a cost-benefit analysis because it costs a lot of money to roll this out in 100 communities in Pennsylvania. When I say it costs a lot of money, it's all relative, right? If you're from the prevention world, it feels like we spend a lot of money, $60 million, that's a lot of money. If we were in corrections, we would think, well, that doesn't even pay for our lunch meat for a day, right? So it seemed to the policymakers who weren't used to making an investment, a realistic investment in prevention, it seemed like a lot of money. So we did a cost-benefit analysis to see whether it was cost-effective as well as effective. And what we found when we monetized the value of the outcomes that were generated from this statewide rollout in these 100 communities, when we put a dollar value to the reductions in crime and drug use and social service and welfare usage, when we put a dollar value to the increased tax revenue generated by increased graduation rates, and subtracted from that the cost of providing all these programs, we found that it had generated a $200 million positive return on investment. That's a $5 return for every dollar that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania had spent. If I gave you $1, or if I told you that for every dollar you gave me, I would give you $5 back, what would you do? You would give me all of your money. If you know that you're going to get a $5 return for every dollar you invest, you're going to find every dollar you can and invest. So, and that's what we really need to be doing. We need to be thinking about shifting resources upstream to get ahead of these costly problems. In short, my message here today is that the Youth Promise Act it's more than a promise. It's going to deliver. And we know that it's going to deliver because we've seen it deliver when it's been used in many, many diverse communities throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It's generated both outcomes and it's generated an incredibly positive return on investment. So I thank you for inviting me once again to speak on behalf of the Youth Promise Act, and I really hope we can get this through.
To Brian for helping us to just sort of get a real understanding of how much we're really saving when we invest in intervention and prevention. And now we will hear from Bob Baskin, the president of the Peace Alliance, as he talks a little bit more about what people are doing on the ground to get the word out about the Youth Promise Act, and also some of the things that you can do as well. Thank you, and please join me in welcoming Bob.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you, Representative Scott, for this opportunity to share some of our views on the importance of this act and some of the steps that people can take. I should reiterate that I am president of the highly pronounceable The Peace Alliance. And in the spirit of openness and honesty, so that you are not disappointed, I neither sing nor dance. But I do want to share with you a little bit about, first of all, who we are and why we've been asked to participate in this effort. The Peace Alliance is a growing, multi-generational, national grassroots network of some 70,000 supporters and members across the country whom we use to advocate, to educate, and whom we can mobilize for action on behalf of what is our mission, which is to ultimately create a stronger culture of peace and to provide information and action that will increase the likelihood of alternative methods that are non-punitive, non-militaristic, non-incarcerating, that will ultimately make this a more sane world, a more peaceful world. We particularly are working on violence in general, but in particular on youth and gang violence litigation. And we are really pleased to have the opportunity to work with Representative Scott and our colleagues. You know, you've heard an awful lot today on the benefits and the opportunities, really, of what the Youth Promise Act can provide to make this a better country for all, not just our at-promised youth, but as well for our society in general. So you might ask the question, well, why would some group like the Peace Alliance want to support a piece of legislation like this? And the answer is pretty clear. It's because it is very, very consistent with that mission or vision that I spoke about, and can now be put into practice. You know, it's wonderful to have high, lofty goals, but unless they can actually be acted upon and put into place and have an impact and results, they're not really that valuable. But this is an opportunity to make that mission that we have, and I'm sure is shared by many of our colleagues, very, very valuable.
we are really pleased to have been asked by Representative Scott and his people to serve on what is euphemistically referred to as the Youth Promise Action Team, Leadership Team. The Youth Promise Action Leadership Team. We have been honored to be joined by the American Civil Liberties Union and Jen Bellamy, by World Vision, and by the Coalition for Juvenile Justice. And the four of us have been given the easy task of trying to inspire and energize the over 300 organizations that have publicly come out in support of this important legislation. So, why do we think that this particular piece of legislation is so valuable? We simplify. You know, I learned a long time ago, you know, sometimes less is more. So we really talk about three particular positive aspects of the Youth Promise Act. I used to work on the Hill, so I've been on the other side of the table, if you will, and I have an appreciation for what many in this audience are probably experiencing. This particular legislation will establish programs at the community level. The decision-making is made at the community, not at the federal level, of which programs deserve the support that can be then put into effect in their communities. As well has been pointed out by my colleagues here, it is a cost-saving program. There are a variety of different estimates of how much it costs to incarcerate a youth. The latest one I saw was $77,000 a year. I've seen it somewhat lower, down to $50,000. But it's a lot of money to put a kid behind bars for an entire year. We know that these alternative approaches that have been proven are less expensive to run than putting someone in prison. And this is something I frankly, you know how the environment on the Hill is, and you have your particular people who are ideologically on one side, you have some on the other side, and so on. But this is a facet of this particular legislation that should be attractive to everybody. It won't matter whether you're a Democrat, or Republican, a liberal, or a conservative, or what. It's an accountable program. It has the requirement that evidence be provided for funding to continue. And as Representative Scott pointed out, it's not even that you have to look down the line to see, okay, which ones do we have to pump more money in because, they're working and they deserve it. But it's the point that Representative Scott made, that the whole idea here is to get reinvestment of the cost savings that are realized through implementation of this program that truly make this a very, very attractive effort, regardless of what your political philosophy is. So, what does the YPA leadership team, I really do like that name, what does the YPA leadership team think it can do to encourage and energize these supporters that not only the Peace Alliance has, but that the leadership, the over 300 organizations have? We think there are a variety of things. We can and plan and hope to do a number of events around the country. And in some of those events, we actually will encourage singing and dancing and other entertainment venues to make sure that people come and hear the benefits of this program, but as well learn and walk away and come away with the concept that, you know what, I want to invest in this, not financially, I want to invest in it because it's the right thing to do, and I want to be part of it, and I want to help spread the word, and I want to help get my community and my representatives to be supportive of this kind of effort. We also, though, we do advocacy at the Peace Alliance, and others do as well. But we believe that there's a sequential process that can and should be implemented in order to get the word out. And we're planning on doing, as we have done before on other efforts, to organize a Twitter campaign. Now, people my age don't even know what tweeting is, or twitting is, or whatever the phrase is, but I'm told from all of my younger colleagues and employees and interns, many of whom are in the audience today, that tweeting works, and we're going to organize a Twitter campaign. Now, I know you can only use 140 characters. See, I know that much at least. But you can get the word out to at least set the groundwork for letter writing, letters to the editor, blogging, op-eds, and so on, that we believe will, over time, convince people, once they hear, that this is an effort that they need to get behind. I learned a long time ago when you make a presentation like this that it's one thing, yeah, you tell them all about the wonderful things and you educate them and so on, but the real trick that makes a presentation like this hopefully successful is you have to challenge your audience to do something. So let me challenge you. If you happen to be from the public, and I don't know, maybe a few tourists slipped in here, but if you are from the public, here's what you can do. There is a website called youthpromiseaction.org. Youthpromiseaction.org. Once you go to that website, you will be able to, if you don't already know, you can identify who your representative is. All you do is put in your zip code. You can pick up hints on messages that you can tweet. You can pick up language that you can use, and you want to put it in your own mind, of course, but you can pick up language that you can use in letter writing to your representatives. But if you are a staffer, and I know that most of you are, if you are a staffer, here's what you can do. Pay attention to what has been said, listen to the benefits that have been offered, listen to the opportunities that have been described, and go back to your offices and talk to your senior staff, some of you may be that, talk to your member, and tell him or her why this is an important piece of legislation that needs to get passed, and it'll save them money. I thank you.